Hey, I'm Charles Lindsay. I'm here today with Kevin Kelly, and we're going to speak about something that interests both of us greatly in the idea of technological shamanism. This came about as a result of my Field Station 4 exhibition, which is at the Manistee Beach Museum at Kansas State University. So this is an installation in this series that I've been making where I'm merging ideas about deep time and other cultures, the possibility of life elsewhere in the universe, mixed in with certain degree of absurdity and a lot of not knowing. So Kevin and I have known each other for a little while. We were this time last year walking together in China, discussing all kinds of things to that top. And it came up that this topic is of great interest to both of us in our own ways, but with very similar crossover. So Kevin Kelly introduce himself, and then we're going to go ahead and thanks again to the Beach Museum for hosting what was a fantastic show. It was cut short by COVID, but we got 3 of the 11 months in, and it allowed me to realize new work, which as an artist, I'm incredibly grateful for. So Kevin, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Kevin Kelly. I'm senior Maverick at Wired Magazine and author of a number of books. The most latest was called The Inevitable. And I like to think about the meaning of technology, what it means, how it impacts what we think we are here for. And among those meanings that I think technology has a huge effect on that we may not think much about or even articulate very well is its impact on the spiritual, its impact on our understanding of where we fit in the cosmos. And I think this is sort of an underappreciated aspect of technology. And our conversation right now is to maybe explore that a little bit. And I should say that neither Charles nor I have actually talked to each other about this. So this is all brand new. We're going to be exploring in real time, nothing rehearsed here. And so it will have that nature of kind of exploratory conversation where we're trying out ideas with each other. So with that caveat, we'll hope have a conversation that you enjoy.
Perfect. So Kevin, maybe I'll jump in and say, you've been following the digital revolution since one aspect of its inception. Let's say, I don't know where you would pin that yourself, but maybe the 70s on at the latest. And this interest in the possibilities for what between us we're calling technological shamanism or the spiritual. How long have you been thinking about this?
Well, in some sense, I've been thinking about it all my life. I've been much more interested, I guess, in the sort of cosmological station of humans first, before I was interested in technology. My interest in technology came very late in life, let me say it that way. I was sort of a fan of Henry David Thoreau and Walden and that kind of austere arm's length distance with technology. I was not at all, as a kid, really enamored of technology, but I was very interested in sort of understanding that transcendent, even as a young kid, and particularly in through high school. So I was interested in the transcendent, but not technology. And my interest in technology came later, and much to my surprise, when I kind of realized that technology probably could help us with the transcendent. And I would say that was probably in my 30s. And since then, I have really focused on the technological side as a way of bettering humans. So so the short answer, the kind of distillation is, I believe that technology has the power to make us better humans. And in that sense, there's been a total convergence with me in terms of the transcendent and technology.
Interesting. I think one of the things that, well, first of all, I would say that in some ways I came late. As you know, one of the things we shared is I was interested in my early 20s in chasing down the last, animistic tribes, not all of them, but intact peoples. I wanted to learn how people really related to nature, that people that really lived in nature and depended upon it. And then I would say was around 2000 probably when I got very intrigued about technology itself and sort of flipped into a different territory. I went from photo-based work to truly multimedia work, and the capabilities there were fabulous. One area was sound, and I found the ability to mold and play with sound incredibly powerful. Then the other thing I think that's interesting, that's sort of like the spiritual or religious, is somewhere in there is the not knowing, and perhaps people believing in things that they don't understand, which is, I like the idea of, the humility comes with the not knowing. And in my installations, part of what I've been doing in merging artifacts and equipment, some with real sensor feedback and some with mock feedback and mock technology, is also this not knowing. I mean, very few of us, I don't think you and I, could build an iPhone by ourselves, and so forth. So there is this power and this belief in this device. And so one of the things that I'm playing with in the field station is it's very much in the model of these outposts where I worked as a young geologist in the Arctic, and then where I worked in rainforests, real scientific outposts. So I'm taking that model and those structures, but then playing with some of these questions here, whether we call it a transcendence or the idea of access to other ways of thinking, other ways of understanding. And that really circles back to, I think, the shamanism and the animism is this looking for meaning in all things, inanimate and animate.
Yeah. I think we mistakenly, as modern people in 2020, tend to think that we know a lot, that the world is full of lots of answers and a lot of knowledge. And compared to where we were, that's true. But compared to where we're going, we don't know anything. And it's remarkable that maybe only 200 years ago, almost nothing was known about electricity. And they started to do things with electricity without even knowing what it was. And we're kind of like in the same situation right now where we are doing things, let's say with AI, that we don't even know what it is. We don't really, we have a very incomplete and probably very primitive idea of what it is, very close to maybe the idea of like what electricity was before we knew what it was. And that doesn't prevent us from using it, because we will always use things before we understand them. And that's sort of where we are with a lot of technology right now, and things like AI, where what we don't know far overwhelms what we know. So what we want to do is be, as you suggest, be kind of humble about that, and in some ways accept the fact that we are ignorant about these things, and we can't wait until we understand things. I mean, we don't understand how biology works. We raised tomatoes and grew tomatoes centuries before we understood how the cells in the tomato worked. So we don't really need necessarily complete understanding to be able to use things and have them be useful to us. It helps us to make new things and to go further and to manage the problems. But we aren't going to wait, and we shouldn't wait for understanding. So I'm fine with having only partial understanding about the world and even the things that we use. And that kind of a relationship with the built world and known world is replicating what we've had with the natural world. The natural world has always been, and still continues to be, kind of mysterious. We don't know how the brain works, yet we're very comfortable talking to these things. We're very comfortable talking to this other brain that we have no idea how it works, and we have no idea how our own works, but we actually have a craving for that kind of interaction, even though we don't understand it. So, and so I think we're making this second nature, this kind of alternative version of things. And what we want to do is we want to not require that we understand everything, not require that we know all the risks, and not require that we have complete understanding before we actually can either enjoy it or even use it.
Yeah, what an interesting idea that is. To that point, I'm a couple of the devices that are relating to the show at the museum now. One of them is called Capsules, and it's something I built from a salvaged chromatography column, which is this amazing looking device used in biotech. It's something, a device in which future medicines might be tested against pathogens and so forth. Well, I took one of those. It was hand built in France, the one I found in a salvage yard, because I go through these high-tech salvage yards for some of my works, my parts. And then I took rare fluorescent mineral samples from a location in Greenland that I harvested myself at surface, which was thrilling and had a lot of that sort of adult in an Easter egg setting, search in a remote place. But the device then has this sound component, which is also modulated slightly by the viewer's presence with real world field recordings, but then processed. So sonically, you have a soundscape from a world that doesn't actually exist or might exist. So it's sort of creating and rather than posing a question per se, it's creating an environment where maybe the viewer would have some of these questions, the questions about not knowing, or just what the hell is going on, which is the same thing. In another one of the devices that showed there are golden horseshoe crabs, and the horseshoe crabs are gilt in gold. And then a friend worked with me, and we programmed LED lights under there. There's 9 of them in the what's called the crab cage, and through it there's a randomized signaling. You get a sense that these creatures are signaling. One of the things I liked about the horseshoe crab is it's a living fossil, so it's a way to approach ideas about time and deep time. I mean, how do we actually do that? How do we get beyond these temporal frameworks that we tend to live with on a daily basis? So, of course, the horseshoe crabs are very old. And then gold, I mean, there's the bling aspect, but one of the ideas around gold that I like very much is this fact that all the gold on Earth was created in stars that died before ours was born, created in supernovas. So gold then, in a manner of speaking, is a way to access really, really deep time, in a manner of speaking. And so then these things are brought together through these devices that I'm building, these sort of what-if devices. It's interesting. I mean, I lived with an intact tribe, a shaman carrying on, millennial or long traditions in the rainforest in Indonesia. And one of the things I liked was that they had a very strong knowledge of the pharmacopoeia of the rainforest, real medicines and real plants. But then there were a lot of plants like the pitcher plants that it was the aesthetics of the plant itself that was being interpreted. And so there was very much an aesthetic aspect to the healing work they did, as well as real medicinal plants. So that, seeing that shaman merge, of course, there's a lot of theater involved in the shamans building belief and trust in their patients, in their clan, in their tribe. And so, I think maybe there's, in some ways of being an artist, that may continue as well, this idea of, merging theater and technology. And I mean, now I'm just jumping, but I'm thinking it's just total free association, as we said, but the way Steve Jobs used a stage to talk about technology, I mean, I don't know if he comes into the shaman area at all, but maybe he does. I'm curious how you think about that.
Yeah.
Are there people, leaders in the field that you have even talked to about this, or that you intuit that they are thinking about technology this way?
We know from science that the placebo effect works. And so there are people who want to employ that effect. In other words, it's just not that it's present, but that it actually does work. And a lot of the, Western trained doctors understand it. That's why they continue to wear the white coat. It's because that is a shamanistic cloak. That is putting on a costume, putting on the paraphernalia, which will help you believe in them, because that belief will make you better, will help make you better. And so, the question is, are there some of the kinds of things working with not just medical technology, but technology in general? And I'm sure there must be certain aspects of this. I think a recent case, if I may veer into the politics, there was the case of a Cambridge Analytics, which was using or accused of using Facebook data to influence an election. But in fact, it's very unlikely that Cambridge Analytica was able to actually influence anything. And they kind of promised that they would or could. And a lot of people believed that they could. And that belief was probably more influential than their actual influence was. And in fact, in the sort of influencers arena of people having influence, it's the belief that influence will have effect that is probably stronger than any of the influences that those people have. So influence is one of those things, and technology that gives influence is probably susceptible to this idea of the shaman and the belief in the power of the technology. So if we believe that the technology can influence, it has already influenced us.
Sure.
Right? And so whenever I think we get into the human psychology and social psychology and social effects, we're going to see some of these same shamanistic kind of effects take place. And we could even kind of maybe extend it even further to the quantum world, where they have the role of the observer, and the weird paradox of having an observer as part of a system, where the act of observing something influences what has already happened. Okay, so those kind of paradoxes don't make any sense on the common sense logic, but to me have a shamanistic aspect of where there's a certain level of belief or partaking in the experiment just by observing it and being present, and your watching of something is having an influence or having an effect. That to me also has shamanistic aspects.
Sure. And you know what I think in that museum environment, I like the idea that the viewer is altering. They may not be collapsing the field, but they are altering the space by being in it. I like this idea very much. In art, I mean, Joseph Beuys is thought of as the shaman of of any artist. He's the one that would come to mind. And I do like that this idea that it's not a fixed thing that people come in to witness, but that their witnessing is changing the experience itself. Super interesting.
So Charlie, when you were in living with these tribes, how do the tribes themselves understand or place what they're doing as shamanistic? I mean, that's probably an outside word, but how do they talk about what they are doing? What's their understanding of what they are doing? And does that have any meaning or bearing on technology from your point of view?
Well, really interesting idea. I think it's the people I stayed with that were intact to a point where it's kind of like the leopard not questioning its spots. They weren't, there was Islam and Christianity on the flanks of the island. I'm talking about the tribe that I spent the most time with, the Mentawai. So they knew that those groups didn't approve of what they did, but they wouldn't have understood those other belief systems enough for them to be referencing, to have a context. So, what they did was millennial. I mean, there were many times things would be happening, certain rites and rituals. Sometimes there were things they said, this happens very rarely. This might happen decades. I said, then how does anybody know how to do it again? They in some ways they weren't making it up, but it was based on just earlier process. I'm thinking on my feet how they did it. But there were many times when they just did these things. It was highly intuitive, very interesting. Very interesting. Sometimes something would happen, I'd get in. This would be more around like the ritual hunts, and I'd get in, or I'd find out like I just missed, because I went for years, and I'd be like, I just missed this really rare ritual where they go out and say kill specific animals, but there's all these rites around it because there are beliefs about how the spirits of parallel universes are in the wild animals and this and that. And then I'd say, why didn't you, tell me this was going to be going on? They said, you never asked. And so then it really became this, it was the quality of the questions were very important. And then I learned to ask, and to request and say, if something unusual is going on, tell me, give me a heads up. But I had to get educated enough to know that I was missing things. Well, I'm not sure how that relates to the art, but definitely the shamans.
Yeah, I mean, in some senses, most of us modern people don't really think about technology in a certain sense because we've always been surrounded by it, and it's like their world. We have trouble imagining a world without technology. And by the way, that is a very hard world to imagine because it makes us kind of like animals. I mean, we don't have very much as in our animal bodies that would allow us to survive at this point. Even a knife is an artificial claw that we don't have, and so we are wholly dependent on technology for our survival. And yet, it's because of that, it's so close to us with knives and twine and control of fire that we almost really cannot imagine a world. We could not imagine living in a world without at least those elemental tools.
Sure.
And so we would have trouble imagining our true relationship with technology because we can't imagine our life without it.
Sure. Well, that's one of the benefits, certainly, of travel, getting out of our own culture and our own way of living on all levels, to sort of not just to go to a new culture, but to look back on our own with fresh eyes, or maybe not just our culture, but because it's such a hybrid at this point, but the nature of our existence.
And did you think the tribes that you stayed with, that their knowledge can remain intact when confronted by technology, or does it necessarily need to, will it become displaced by technology once technology enters our lives?
Well, I think that group that I was with, well, one thing we know is that in a lot of remote places, they just jump right into like cell phone and high-speed internet on their phone, but it doesn't, I'm not sure it's the same thing, but I remember going in that period when I was looking for tribes that were intact, and then I zeroed in on one and went there. But you might go to like northern Thailand and Golden Triangle, very remote, and you'd come in, there'd be people that were very early in a sense, not Stone Age like the group I was with. And maybe they're wearing T-shirts with like Mickey Mouse on them or something. And a tourist, an adventurer, just some tourist might think like, well, they're ruined. They're wearing Mickey Mouse T-shirts. But it didn't change how they thought. They were still thinking like people thought centuries ago. As you ramp up the technology, I'm not so sure. I mean, I'm not cynical about it. I think that they can use it well. That group that I lived with, ecotourism came in, and I think that stopped their persecution. So, and I think that allowed their culture to continue to flourish in a way. It's a culture that's highly observed because that's the nature of places that get hit heavily by ecotourism. But right. I'm not sure. I mean, I had, this man that I literally shared with him his first experience of photography, pointing the camera, took the picture. He didn't know what the hell I was doing with the device. I came back a year later with photos I'd printed and then laminated. And the classic was with the group photos, where people would look at the group photo and they'd recognize all their friends, and then they go, who is that? Because at that time they only knew themselves through shards of mirror or reflections in water. And then they also, audio recording, they'd recognize other people's voices, but not their own. And you'd actually see that. It didn't take long. It's fractions of a second, but the recognizing oneself. So learning to read a photograph, learning to hear a voice. And so the technology gets adopted. And then, so most of those trips were about a year apart, 10 months apart, over a decade. And then a friend of mine went in sort of I don't know, a decade ago, maybe it was less than that, anthropologist went in and did a video interview with this shaman I'd lived with all these years, living back in an analog world where communication took a long time by post. And it sent me, on Zoom, a postcard of my friend speaking to me, the shaman basically saying, hurry up, there's a festival about to begin, bring lots of tobacco and salt and, come visit us. I mean, even that use of technology was profound. I mean, he was there in his loincloth and tattoos and the teeth chiseled to points. And so it wasn't a two-way conversation, but nonetheless, it was shocking. It was shocking. So I don't feel in that way that the culture is, but I mean, we're talking such short time frames,
Right.
As far as cultures go.
So it's possible that we could actually have modern versions of techno shamans, and these would be, and I see this possibility much more when we have more ubiquitous AIs popping up or behind the scenes, and that is that these might be people who have an intuitive sense of how this technology works. As I said before, when most of the people don't understand it, it is possible you could have these AI whisperers or people who have an intuitive sense of how these AIs work, because they're going to be much closer to animal intelligence, much closer to kind of a biological intelligence than they are going to be to human intelligence, these AIs. These AIs are going to have many functions that we have, but not all of them. And then in the various combinations and mixtures, I think they're going to resemble living things, but not human things. And so it's very possible that we could see shaman-like characters who have some gift for communicating and understanding how these alien intelligences are working, which is what we would kind of think of as animals and the natural world, as they're the alien in the sense that they're not humans. And I think that's part of maybe what today's shamans are tapping into, this other worldly intelligence, consciousness. And I think we'll see another opportunity for that as these AIs begin to populate, and there'll be certain people who will be inclined to know more and understand more and work with them, and their abilities will seem to us magical.
And do you imagine such an individual? One, do you think that that's territory of artists and philosophers, or could an engineer be that person, or it's just some hybrid personality that gets it?
Yeah, I think at first it's much more likely to be artists, explorers, because this is going to be a place where you have to waste a lot of time. This is not going to be an efficient territory in the beginning. And so it'll attract people who don't mind wasting a lot of time, not getting very far, having dead ends, not being efficient. Over time, it may be that there would be engineers who have some intuitive sense and have learned, and they can, make money off of it. But I think in the beginning, it's much more going to be in the territory of those who are more explorers and playful, rather than someone trying to engineer things. It's going to take a while to kind of discover this before we know enough to be able to engineer.
Mm.
So artists would be certainly in that category of playing with these minds. And right now we have that is in fact what's happening. Some of the AIs are being used for generative art, and the artists who are coming to it are understanding that it's not like the AI is making the art, that this is far from their capabilities, but they can work, the artist can work with this power to help their art. So the art is co-creation in some ways, at some level, and whether it's they're curating it or they're having a conversation with the AI. So there is a sense in which the artists now using it understand that it's an alliance with this other force rather
Mm.
than turning it over to them.
Yeah, interesting. In fact, at the SETI Institute's Artist in Residence program, which I founded and have now moved on from, we have an open call up now in a collaboration with Ars Electronica in Linz for an AI lab. So it's open to the top artists in the world that are exploring AI. However they do it, again, it's not necessarily literally as you suggest. It's probably premature for that, but philosophically. So it's actually that SETI Institute Air program in conjunction with Ars Electronica are actually beginning to it both inspire and hopefully empower artists in this very territory. Although, I mean, it hasn't been called anything like shamanism. I mean, we'll see where the chips fall. Such an interesting territory.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I wrote a graphic novel called The Silver Cord, which was about AIs and angels, and it could be that people who have access to this alien type of thinking, some people might find it useful to help humans in their own journey because it's other. And all the hero stories are stories about the hero being disrupted out of their ordinary everydayness by this confrontation with the other,
Mm-hmm.
who helps them move them on their arc towards a new level, to come back in at a different place than where they began. And so people who are in health, people who are in counseling, people who have power, pastoral power, may tap into this otherness that the AIs, and this always plural, are involved in, to be able to use that otherness to help humans on our journey individually and collectively. And so that otherness, which is what you were talking about when you go visit a tribe, is also, the otherness is what the shaman goes visits when they're traveling into the other realms. That technologically is going to become more available to us. That supreme alien otherness that we might have to go off planet, visit galaxies for, will now be a little bit more accessible to us because we can make artificial aliens, and we can make an artificial ways of thinking that are highly sophisticated but different from us. And the value of different today is so immense, because when we are connected 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to all the other minds on the planet, it becomes really hard to think different.
That's right.
And so this being able to touch this otherness, this other intelligence, this other thing that has been brought to us by technology will be very powerful.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that almost all animistic tribes and shamans did was, explore the pharmacological tools, which you could, in some ways you could call that like a technology, a molecular technology, I suppose.
Absolutely.
And so it starts to sound like the AI as well. When you said, obviously like the knife is a claw that we don't have. And then when we think of AI, or we think of the Voyager, spacecraft going outside of our own solar system, I've always, since I was a kid, I just think of that as us. I mean, I think a lot of humans think of us and technology. It's like adversarial. And, there's a lot of people that think about AI in that way, that it's going to be this malign adversary. But whereas you're really suggesting, I mean, it may be that, but it may be everything, right?
Well, I think, first of all, that the first animals that we domesticated were ourselves. All right, humans invented humanity. We invented ourselves. We constructed it, and we are still in the business of inventing ourselves. So as we domesticated other animals, like the herding animals that made milk, Well, we quickly evolved in some populations, a lactose tolerance in adults. So we changed our genetics in response to something we invented. The invention of cooking allowed us changes in our jaw and teeth, which we could see in the historical record, because we could now chew and eat things that had been pre-digested through cooking. Okay, so we didn't have to have as powerful teeth as we had before. We could have smaller teeth because we were pre-digesting it through cooking, this technology of control of fire. So we've been changing ourselves through our inventions, and we continue to do that. So we're not separate from technology. We are already somewhat technological. That's why this idea of us and there's technology and us. No. We're bound very closely to technology, and our humanity is a technology itself. And humanity broadly, like our society, our civilization, these are things that we invented: rules, law, even our intuitive sense of justice. These are things that we have given ourselves. And so I don't see technology as outside. I think we are that expanding ring of going outward. That is us, and it does include the machines that we make, and it does include our inventions, and it does include all the changes that we've made to ourselves and that we're going to make.
So in when we brushed on this topic, as we said, we didn't go that deep. We started with it. I know you've made art thinking like a shaman in your way. Mm-hmm. You showed me some mock-ups, some small things. And so when you think about it, when you think about the role of the artist in this domain particularly now, how do you imagine that? What is that role? Is it different than a shaman in the past? I mean, a shaman would heal, a shaman would help keep the tribe together, a shaman would try to offer explanations for wicked weather and disease and so forth. Is the role any different now, or do you think it's actually like circling right back? I mean, by thinking in terms of shamanism.
Yeah. It's a really good question, and I haven't thought about it before. But I would say, I think what we're doing with our inventions and what we are kind of right at the cusp right now is we're making technology as complicated as biology and natural systems. All right. I mean, the internet and the number of moving parts, the number of parts, the scale are all beginning to approach biological systems. And the thing about biological systems is that they're out of control. We don't understand them. They're ununderstandable. And our technology is starting to reach that same place where we've made things so complicated that we don't really understand them. Okay. And so I think that's the point in which you have people who have some intuitive understanding, of some ability above average to help guide us into that and through that, and to make use of it and to explain it and to help us cope with it. Because we are not going to understand the future technologies that we make. We're going to make AIs that we don't understand how they work. We don't understand how they come to their decisions that they come to. They're just too complicated. Just as we don't understand how our own brains work, and yet every day we use them and we crave them, even though we don't understand them. So I think the role for people who can guide us through this, who can bring back good news, who can give us hope, who can help make us better, who can heal us in the environment of an artificial environment, not just the natural world that we have, but the natural world plus this secondary world, this second creation, this artificial world that will be layered on top, that will be in many ways as complicated and as important. And so I think we are going to rely on people, and sometimes they'll be trained for certain parts of this. Other times they might have an intuitive sense, and other times they may be making it up. And you know, and so, which is I'm pretty sure is the three ways shamans come about. And so I think I think that's going to be necessary, that we have people that can help others get through into this world and make the most of it, and and try to use it for good. Because for most people, they're not going to have inclination, and they're not going to bother. It's going to be too complicated, and all the usual reasons. Or else they don't have the right mix of personality to do it. And here and there will be people who will be able to come back and say, I have a hunch. I've entered into the network, and I've come back to tell you that we need to do this, or you need to do that. And I've seen things that would surprise you. And if you saw what I saw, you would agree. So I think that's going to be a story that we're going to hear more and more into the future. Someone who's gone into the depths of the networks, into the bowels of the technological machine, and come back with insight.
Yeah. I like that very much. And I think, well, you and I both have explored remotely, and in sort of the way exploration was thought of in the 19th century, and then early 20th, and then this idea of exploring now, whether what degree of virtual or other, maybe not even virtual. I think one of the other things,
a lot of the hackers, young hackers, have this is what motivates them. People, I mean, there are some bad apple hackers who uncover things they want to sell, credit cards to the highest bidder for some money. But often where those credit cards come from are more innocent hackers who are there simply for the thrill of exploration. And they come across stuff, and some criminals say, hey, I'll give you, $100 for this. And they say, okay. But the original impetus for their explorations are much more along the lines of they're exploring. They're just trying to figure out how it works. They just want to know what's at the bottom. They're going through there. And
it's spelunking.
Spelunking, right. And they come back and they're trying to impress their friends with these amazing stories of the creatures and monsters that they've seen.
Right.
And so that is, and that's right now with what I would call fairly flat, cartoonish, primitive, inert networks. Once we have AI embedded into this in a deep way, these networks are going to have much more vivid, lifelike qualities to it, and that attraction will be more, and the benefit of having these explorers will be even more.
Yeah, even when you speak that way, I'm conjuring just this an amorphous shape, a multi-dimensional amorphous shape that's moving in. Very speculative fiction. One of the things I try to do in my work is, with some of it is, I'm interested in absurdity. And I think, it's probably obvious to some part of that. I mean, as you know, I'm literally about to move to Kyoto to work with a Zen abbot, exploring ideas about consciousness, and of course the great tradition of koans. I mean, you see how that I'm very interested in studying with him, and the way that it sort of cracks us. It's in some ways it's that version of travel, when we travel to go somewhere else, however we travel. But also I think absurdity and humor is also a way to sort of crack us, allow us maybe to see things differently, besides just resting the intense, the intensity of the machinery that some of us live with between our ears.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? I mean, shamans, the theater. I mean, I never met a shaman that wasn't a practical joker. That's for sure. Right? A
Yeah.
prankster.
Well, practical jokes. I think the reason why humor works is that it is there's a tension, there's a contradiction, there's often paradox, and certainly a conflict of two different ways of seeing things that you try to see at the same time. So I think my own theological view of the universe is that at its foundation, it rests on a paradox, that the paradox is the necessary paradox at the bottom of creation, which is self-creation, right? I mean, you have either the universe or God self-creating itself, and that is fundamentally a paradox. And from that paradox springs all the other paradoxes. And out of that, we become humor, and we have insight, and we have profundity, and we've got enlightenment. And all those are founded on paradox. And so, it's no surprise that the technological world will be rife with paradox as well.
Yeah, you think about hackers as pranksters. Obviously, that's part of the ethos, right?
That's a great analogy. They're the coyote mischief characters coming back with pranks and messing with the basic paradoxical nature of networks.
I'm sort of thinking, I imagine this in the Bay Area for some reason, but these characters that would be our technological shamans, I wonder if they would be shunned in general or if they were welcomed, or probably both, I guess, right? It's kind of an all the above.
Tell me what it was, the social status of shamans in the tribes.
The highest order.
The highest order.
Yeah.
They weren't ever.
And the group I was with didn't have chiefs, so all the political decisions were made collectively, but some shamans were higher than others for sure, because of how they healed and their charisma and so forth.
Because I've heard there were some tribes where they were kind of transgendered type people who were both discriminated against and also held in some regard for their access to divinity. And I don't know if that was true where you were.
Well, there were a number of ways they became shamans. One of my mentors was Lyle Watson, and he wrote a book called Lightning Bird about a Western man who was epileptic in Africa, and in effect a shaman. He would go into villages and capture like mambas and take them away, and he was epileptic, and so in their cultures he was revered because that was a marker of being a powerful shaman. And yeah, sure, there are definitely sometimes those gender questions, but trance in those traditional cultures, the people that are good at trance, and I've seen fakers, but I've seen people that shamans that were they were tapping into something.
Yeah.
So I guess it's a broad spectrum.
Trance, of a technological trance. The one thought I had on technological trances is that it occurred to me at one point that if I was to retrace, say, an hour that I spent surfing the web, that it's exactly a trance state. You're kind of skipping through a dream logic. You're kind of, it might seem reasonable at the time, but if you take a look at it, it's like, that's completely absurd. I'm going, from where I ended, from where I started, it's completely an absurd arc. And it's a kind of a trance, and so you could say that the billions of hours that people spend surfing the web is a collective trance state. Yeah. And, Google's kind of extracting data, information, maybe knowledge, maybe value from that collective trance state, where we are sort of we're exploring, but we're not even sure what we're exploring. And collectively, we're exploring something, but we're not even sure. And there's a kind of a collective trance that's done when we lose our sense of time surfing the web.
Sure. I mean, I think of trance as sort of getting out of ourselves, our daily concerns. And so some of that must happen on the web. I mean, it happens in gaming, obviously. Does it happen in shopping? I'm not sure if that counts, but maybe it,
Right.
you know, I,
Yeah, maybe not
yeah,
when you're shopping, but maybe when you go look something up and then you take a footnote in the Wikipedia, and next thing there's some guy who has a website there, and you find out he has this interesting hobby you've never heard about, and you're nowhere near where you began.
right.
And in that process, that's a dream state.
Sure. One of the questions I've had is, you know, and I'm curious how you feel about this. Or think about this? Does this idea of AI? Does machine learning AI at an nth state further down the road, whether that's 20 or 100 years or 1,000 years from now? Does it become super logical? I mean, in our culture, obviously, Spock represented that super logic. And so one is a question, does it, like an organic system, go crazy all over the place, in manner of speaking crazy, or does it go logical, mathematical? And then a question related to that is, I just wonder if in a super logical state, might even be post-biologic, does art even have a place anymore? You could almost say, does art and religion have a place in a perfectly logical world?
Yeah.
And then,
So the one thing I have to kind of what's the word I want? Press against is the word it. So there's not just one AI. It's like if you were to visit a Stone Age tribe and talk about technology and machines, and they would keep asking you about the machine. When you have the machine,
sure.
what do you do? And you have to keep saying, no, you understand, there's lots of machines. They all do something different. There's no one big machine that's doing everything. And this is the same thing with AIs, is that there will be thousands of AIs. Some of them will be programmed to be incredibly logical, but they'll be stupid in other ways. And some of them will be creative, will actually be programmed, engineered to be very, very creative, but they'll be horrible about doing arithmetic. Okay, and you say, well, why can't I make one that does everything equally well? Well, that is the engineer's dilemma, is that you always have trade-offs. You can't make a machine that's the fastest, most flexible, cheapest, most robust, lightest. It's engineering, you always have trade-offs, and we will always have trade-offs in the AI world. So in order to make something more flexible and creative, you're going to have to reduce something over here. So yes, we will have AIs that will be incredibly creative in certain dimensions. And people will say, well, what about humans? Well, the thing about humans is that our intelligences are an incredible trade-off. We're not a general purpose machine. Once we start to make thousands of artificial minds, we'll realize that our own minds are way off in the corner. They're a very peculiar, weird combination that's not going to be found anywhere else in the universe. And people will say, that is such an odd, weird combination you have of cognition in your mind. Because we've engineered all these trade-offs to survive on this planet. And they'll say, well, I mean, you can't do probability in your head? What's the matter with you? That's weird. Who would have ever invented a mind like that? So our own brains are not general purpose. There is no general purpose intelligence. They're all special, just like there's no general purpose machine. Where is the general purpose machine? We've had 200 years to make a general purpose machine. Have we made one? No, because it's going to be poor. It's not going to do anything really very well. And the same thing with all intelligences. We don't have a general purpose intelligence. We have a very, very specific kind of really, really weird thing. And we're going to make a lot of other weird, specific kinds of minds to do all kinds of things. And sometimes they'll take a lot of different things they want to do and make them, and they'll have trade-offs, and they'll not be very good at any of them, but they'll do them together. And so, yes, we can make very logical type thinking like a Spock, but that's probably not going to be the same one who's going to work with artists to make the most amazing symphony.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the idea of applying AI to music is very interesting. What
And
will that be?
they've done it already. And
Sure.
there's one, and here's where I think some of the best use case for this is really, really cool, which is you take, say, I'll take a gamelan piece and I want to take Mozart and I want to make a hybrid of those. What's in between? What's the offspring of gamelan and Mozart? It's exploring all those white spaces in between. I think that's one of the chief immediate uses we could really kind of explore with this is, let's take rap and, and Ethiopian pop songs, and we'll make some weird hybrid, and we'll have a dial. And so that's something AI is actually pretty good at doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, I'm looking forward to that. That sounds like exactly what I want right now.
there is an AI that's been doing it, and the problem is that most of those examples are unlistenable, right?
Uh-huh.
So the answer is that most of those hybrids are sterile. They're just completely, they're stillborn even, and so the number of places where there might actually be a viable hybrid is probably very, very tiny.
Well, art and music, I mean, it's so subjective, our responses to it. But as the AI gets smarter, it'll tailor for us as individuals, won't it? I mean, that's
not the it. Some of them will.
Right.
Some of them will, and that's good news and bad news. It's like having somebody only show you things that they know you like.
Yeah.
When occasionally you want someone to show you something that you either didn't like before, or they didn't know that you had no idea whether you liked or not. And so we as humans want both.
Yeah.
And there actually may be different machines to use in those different cases.
Yeah. In the art museum format, one of the things that I don't do in my own work, I dislike, is when you have a big board that tells you what you're about to see and how you should feel about it. I like to, I think it's just such a privilege to be able to experience something fresh, especially as adults. I mean, how often do we get that beginner's mind, child mind, where you experiencing something really fresh? I mean, we have the background of our life behind us and so forth, of course, our tastes and our assumptions. I mean, assumptions is a very interesting concept, but I'd like to create a situation in the museum and certainly at the beach at Kansas State Museum. Hopefully people are walking in and going, one, they've never seen that. I think that's fair to say. But then what the hell is going on? One of the things that I would experience in those salvage yards in Silicon Valley is seeing very complicated equipment made at very, very high production levels, which I find aesthetically thrilling, but then not having a clue what that stuff does. And then I would often buy these things that cost NASA or the taxpayer or private industry hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I'm buying it at scrap weight. But then I retroactively, sort of in an autodidact mode, I dive in to find out what that thing did and how does it work. So there's this whole education, personal education, before I put whatever it is I put out there. And then I'm not putting these things out there saying you might think or feel anything. I'm just putting these things out there. You come in and go from there. Of course, we're humans. We like feedback. It's interesting to have a conversation, even if we're just looking at a piece of glassware that was handmade or something. These are all things that I'm giving away as I'm about to move, and I'm having the molting of all time. The Silver Cord, your book, I read recently, and it's in the 4 boxes of books of friends and critical books after giving the local library about 20 other boxes. anyway, you know, I think I'm intentionally folding something in, but this idea of molting, you know, it's part of what the shamans do as well, is they go through this ritualized, this symbolic, you know, sheathing, this molting of one being to become another, which you spoke about earlier, whether we call it levels, you know, the different ways we leave one and move on to another. Um, yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and as you mentioned, that leveling up is sort of built into the very metaphor and logic of video games, which, by the way, I think are hugely underappreciated as a cultural force in at least the modern world right now. You know, it's kind of considered a low art, but like all low arts, there are low arts when you're kids, and then by the time you're adults, they're high art.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of leveling up and going through levels, I think, is something that we will use technology for, and uh, and I think that's also the role of the mentors and the shamans and the pastors and the teachers in our lives to help us level up, to keep, you know, keep upping in our narrative arc. That you know, the idea that there is a narrative arc is a kind of one of those rarefied knowledges like kerning and letting that used to be known by a very small group of people and now is taught in grade school. And I think the same, and cartography is going through the same kind of a move from the professionals down to the everyday person. I think the whole idea of the storytelling logic has now moved from the screenwriters' rooms into most people understanding that there's, you know, heroes, it's a hero's journey, there's a narrative arc, and that your life has an arc or should have an arc, and that you should be on a journey to somewhere where you are becoming more of yourself. And I think that is what the shaman is there to help us do. Get in part of the way we do that is get in touch with something bigger than ourselves.
Sure.
And technology is one of the things that's bigger than ourselves. And we are making it ever, ever, ever bigger. And becoming in touch with technology will be one of the ways in which we can rise out of ourselves. And so going into nature has always been there, and it will hopefully we'll continue to have that avenue. Going interiorly and having the inner journey, meeting God and having enlightenment remains. It's harder to do because of distractions, but that's still a possibility. I think there's a third way now. I'm all about the third way. And the third way is through technology, through recreating, through making artificial worlds, artificial universes, artificial realities. And this artificial other is a third way to experience something bigger than ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Beautiful.
So we've been about an hour. Maybe do you have any couple other things we wanted to kind of touch on as we wrap up?
Well, I think there was a one point I wanted to ask is and well, let's just see if there's a there or not. I think we're in great shape now. Sacred technology.
Uh-huh.
You had some thoughts on that, as I recall.
Yeah. So, you know, speaking of kind of being in touch with bigger than ourselves, we all understand that you march into the cathedral of redwoods. There's a majesty and transcendent transportation to another state of being, or it could be a majestic scene otherwise, or some people experience going down to the coral reef and you just have this kind of an aha experience. we see that happening in nature. And so the question was, could there be an equivalent in the technological world where there was a place or state or something where you would feel the holy, or you would say, this is sacred, this is a sacred axis, this is a sacred portal, this is a sacred, there's some power here that we don't ordinarily encounter. And I don't have any examples of where I think that, but I do occasionally, entering into the internet and the library of all knowledge, have a little glimmer that we could potentially see that. So I'm just suggesting that we be open to the possibility that there be modes of technology that we might come to regard as sacred, in the sense of maybe, I don't know, wanting to protect them or honor them or to designate them or to set them apart, or in some way to recognize the fact that they have a bit of power. Now, you were mentioning molecules. There's psychedelics, and there's a number of psychedelics that have that power, and I would call them kind of sacred in a certain sense, because people do use them recreationally, and they do them frivolously, and they do them without much preparation. And I believe that they are too powerful just to be treated that way, and then they should be treated more like a sacrament. And that you should approach them with set and setting and some guidance and training, and that they should be treated with more respect. And maybe we could think of them as kind of sacred technologies that should be used in that way. And it may be possible now with the neural linking technology that's coming along that interfaces with our brain. There may be something where we come to arrive that we want to treat that in a different way. Maybe because of its power, maybe it can read our brain, and therefore we're making ourselves vulnerable and transparent, and we might want to impose on we might want to guard them in a certain sense and treat that power with respect. And that's what I would call it sacred.
Yeah, I've often thought there should be, and there may be, like a psychotropic DNA bank, which is, there may be such a thing. I mean, when you see those, the computer graphic modeling of how the molecule of like LSD or any of these classic, how they fit like a complicated key into our neural receptors, it's pretty curious that exists at all.
Yeah,
I mean, talk about absurd. I mean, that is,
it's really weird. And how we discovered it too, which is really even weirder.
Yeah.
This weird molecule in some random mushroom that happens to trigger our utmost insights. Like, that's strange. So,
yeah. But let me just go for that for one. When you see, when you're in the rainforest with the shamans, and you think of the medicinal plants, psychedelic plants, any of them, you think in evolutionary terms, you imagine there had to be somebody that ate the wrong one and kicked the bucket, and in a long chain of these things. But being with a particular master shaman, and to see that how intuitive they were in nature. I mean, that's one of the things I went to experience. And I mean, I have that sensibility myself when I'm in the woods. I mean, I think maybe a lot of people do. If you have that proclivity, when you go in, it wakes it up. And then with training, you get better, whether we're talking about being a mycologist or a forager or whatever it is. And so that intuitive level, I mean, in nature is a place where that can be experienced quite readily. But I guess it's happening, as you say, like in technology as well, whether it's gamers or coders, where they're highly intuitive. Very interesting.
They have an intuitive sense of how the system's working, what makes it break or doesn't break, where the loopholes are, how it can be exploited or managed or extracted. And as we make these systems even more complex, I think that that kind of a skill, that kind of awareness, that kind of knowledge, that kind of sensibility will become more valuable. And some parts of it can be trained and taught. Some might be something that you have to kind of acquire yourself, and others may be temperamental, depending on your quality of attributes you were born with. And so, but the important part, I think, is that it's not going to go away. This what's the word I want? Neither the craving that we have for transcending out of the ordinary and touching another level bigger than us, nor the means to do that, more of the cultivation of the means, whether it's technology, shamans, portals, teachings, religions, all those things are things that will facilitate our craving for that. And I think they will all have more and more a technological component. And technology being both the place or the realm that's bigger than ourselves, and the means to reach it.
Yeah, great.
So, Charles, thanks
Wonderful.
for the conversation.
Thank you. Really great to
Congratulations
get going.
on your exhibit. And it was a real pleasure to be able to chat with you and throw out some of these crazy ideas. We'll see which ones work.
Given in time, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks so much for doing this. Real pleasure.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay.